Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for providing a light-hearted view of everything else that we've talked about this morning. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to hand over for the final part of this morning for a question and answer session that we have. But I'll introduce you, if I may, to Mr. Shyam Mehra, who's a senior advisor to Security Watch India, professional police officer with 38 years of experience, started as a superintendent of police in 1974, and served in several capacities in the state and central government, including Inspector General of Police, Joint Secretary of the National Security Council Secretariat. He was in the Prime Minister's office and Commissioner of Security, particularly looking at civil aviation. Sir, over to you.
Very unusual session called the questions and answers session. This is something which I've never done before, but in any case I'll try and do it now. But before we go on to the questions and answers session, I'd just like to remind you of all that has transpired so far and make a few additional comments from my side, not on business but on the Indian security environment, which is germane to driving the business, that is the Indian Homeland Security business that you are here for today. Mr. Patrick Mercer, MP, has quite rightly touched on Osama's recent killing and contextualized the highly worrying regional security environment that we have in and around India, with the AFPAC situation actually holding the key to what lies ahead: more trouble, or worse still than more trouble. With the USA both willing to intervene in Pakistan, like you rightly pointed out, and at the same time preparing, because of domestic reasons, to draw down, the emerging situation can be highly unpredictable. And thereafter, Maruf, my colleague from SWI, went on to elaborate on the Indian security environment. Both the Pak-sponsored terrorism that we have faced for nearly 6 decades, and our own indigenous conflicts, which have lasted over a very long period of time and still go on. Mr. John Gordon and Sanjeev Puri, my other colleague from Security Watch India, brought out, Sanjeev in particular quite humorously, the labyrinth of the internal security machinery that you would have to deal with, and ways and means to go about doing business in India and ensuring that your efforts are grounded success. Well, just let me now briefly state in bullet points, before we go to the question and answer session, what I see as the drivers behind the burgeoning homeland security business in India for the next decade, at least for the next decade or two. Maruf has already touched upon it, but just let me put it in terms of statistics. In the last 6 decades of insurgency and terrorism that we have faced, we have lost, at a moderate count, 65,000 lives. 65,000 lives. At one point of time, in 2001, we had casualties of 6,000 in the year, that is 2001. Now this was amongst the highest in the world at that point of time. It was only overtaken subsequently by the casualties that happened in Iraq, or what transpired in Pakistan from 2007 onwards. And Pakistan had over 11,500 casualties in the year. So this is the dimension of the problem. more deaths in internal security conflicts, some of those sponsored from outside, than in 3 conventional wars and a limited conventional skirmish, that is the Kargil War with Pakistan in 1999. Now that is the dimension of the problems that we face. But there are 2 or 3 events that happened which have dramatically altered the perception of our own preparedness, and that too negatively. The first was Mumbai on 26/11, and the second was another horrendous event with which many are not familiar, which happened in April 2010, when one of our seasoned forces, founded again by the British, called the Crown's Reserve Police, subsequently changed, founded in 1934, which I happened to command, and which subsequently, after independence, acquired the acronym of the Central Reserve Police Force, the largest paramilitary force in the world today with 250 battalions. A very seasoned force. It suffered 72 killed in an attack by Maoists in Dantewada in Chhattisgarh. Now that sent the second round of tremors in the Indian government after the incident of 26/11, which you all know because it was so highly sort of recorded and publicized over media. This is the other event about which very few people would have known. Immediately thereafter, the Maoists, who pose one of the biggest threats to India, sabotaged a railway line in West Bengal, one of the other provinces that we have, which is now the worst Maoist affected province in the country. The derailment of an express train that followed thereafter resulted in the death of 140 passengers and injuries to around 200. All these events, like I said, have dramatically altered the perception of our own preparedness. All these events have exposed weaknesses, terrible weaknesses, in conventional policing, in counter-terrorism operations, in maritime security, in critical infrastructure protection. And that's why I say that Homeland Security, or the augmentation of the Homeland Security structure, has to go on apace for the next decade. There is no way out. There is absolutely no alternative for India. Now, the events of April 2010, which I talked about, that is the Maoist attack on a company-level patrol of the CRPF, exposed how critically Maoists had stolen a march over the security forces in terms of capabilities, in terms of tactics, in terms of fieldcraft, that is jungle warfare, and in terms of acquisition of lethal arms and equipment. We have been dealing with the Maoist problems almost since 1967. It has had its vicissitudes, it's risen, it's fallen in terms of its lethal potential, but it has always been there. The embers have always burnt. On occasions, they have burgeoned into raging fire, and that is what we have today. The biggest threat that India faces, internal security threat, is from the Maoists. It is an indigenous threat. Now what happened? Why did things transpire the way they did? Why were we caught off guard? Clearly, the fault lay in political underestimation of the Maoist movement and its potential. I happened to be then in the National Security Council and looked after this problem. We documented the consolidation and militarization of the movement. In terms of militarization, maybe of interest to you to know that from small squads, the Maoists gradually incrementally grew into a People's Guerrilla Liberation Army. As you know, every term in the Maoist jargon has a meaning in terms of operations and tactics on them. So from small squads of 10 and 12 persons in 1967, armed with basic homemade weapons and a couple of firearms, who attacked so-called class enemies, it has grown into an army, once again organized on classical Maoist guerrilla lines, which is now capable of fixed piece battle, mobile warfare, as well as total domination in areas where it has strongholds. So there is no way out for the Indian government but to combat this menace. What happened after 26/11 was that the incumbent Home Minister, who literally slept over the Maoist problem, underplayed it, and thereby brought about a situation where we reaped the harvest, as it were, the devastating harvest in 2010. He was ousted, and the present Home Minister, Mr. Chidambaram, took over. Mr. Chidambaram is quite clear that the security infrastructure all around in the country has perforce to be upgraded. Now, Maruf has just explained to you how in India, police and law and order is in fact a state subject under Article 267 of the Indian Constitution. Therefore, the states hold the primary responsibility for maintaining law and order in their own areas, as well as in maintaining and arming their police force. That said, the center also plays an overall role in guiding and in financing the state police forces, as well as aiding them if exigencies of internal security so require. And that we do through agencies like the Central Reserve Police Force, which is a central force. There was a dichotomy in the approach of the center and the state governments to security. That dichotomy in the approach, where the states were not so serious and felt that it was in fact a responsibility of the center, has altered. Most of the state chief ministers realized after the Mumbai incident, when the Maharashtra government was in serious trouble, the state chief minister was in serious trouble, that security has to be given its due importance. Therefore, there is now a much greater convergence between the center and the states in going about the upgradation of security. And in consequence, you find that the budgetary outlays, both of the center and the states, have been increasing ever since 2008. And this process is still inadequate. And Chidambaram has said that very, very candidly to the chief ministers, that they need to invest much, much more in their state police forces. Therefore, I see the state police budgets growing, the central budget and investment growing in the security infrastructure, and therefore much greater business opportunities. Following Mumbai, like I said, Mumbai exposed several weaknesses. One of them was that critical infrastructure in this country was woefully neglected and not protected. Now, much of the critical infrastructure in the country is with the government, but much of it is now in a developing economy being invested in by the private sector. After 26/11, the private sector is beginning to realize that they require to invest much more in the security of their own critical infrastructure. Otherwise, they have a problem on hand. The Tatas have shown the lead in this respect. They have augmented the security of their critical infrastructure, their hotels, their business premises, their industries, and so on and so forth. The others are following suit. In fact, we have a force called the Central Industrial Security Force, which was basically meant to protect government critical infrastructure. But the recent amendment to the CISF Act has allowed the private business also to requisition CISF for its own security. You will not believe it, 150 firms in the country have applied for CISF support. And it's just not available. Because as you all know, there is a gestation period of anywhere between 3 to 5 years to raise more force and to make it deployed. Therefore, there is great opportunity for the private sector to get into business in augmenting the Indian private sector and its security structures. Over the past 2 years, there has been a declining level of violence in the country, but we cannot derive much satisfaction out of it. We have to contend with the facts on the ground, and the facts on the ground are what Mr. Patrick Mercer just pointed out. It's a very, very difficult situation. As Bruce Rydell points out, we live in the most difficult neighborhood in the world. The AFPAC situation, like I said, is key to the evolving events. Any early US withdrawal from from Afghanistan, or the return of the Taliban to power with Pakistani support is going to lend a lot of impetus to radical forces and extremist alliances in that area. And we in India are going to face the brunt of it. So we need to be prepared for the worst case scenario, which means once again augmenting our resources to combat the menace. And that is where, once again, the business opportunities will lie, and we shall hopefully move incrementally forward in securing the homeland. So this is briefly the background and briefly the summary of the discussions that we've had today, and now we can throw the house open to questions by the audience and have an interactive session. Yes, please.
I've got a question in two parts. One is, do you perceive that there is a cyber threat to India, and if you do, who owns the problem? And secondly, who is responsible for aviation security in India?
I'll answer the latter first, and the first part of the question next, because I'm not an expert in cybersecurity. Aviation security, yes. Aviation security, because I was the Commissioner for Aviation Security. Aviation security is primarily in the domain of the Ministry of Civil Aviation, number one. But aviation security also has to be seen in the larger context of the Ministry of Home Affairs providing the necessary guidance and the intelligence inputs to secure aviation against attacks. The third thing is that in the Ministry of Civil Aviation, the Commissioner of Security for Civil Aviation has been appointed and designated to the International Civil Aviation Organization as the appropriate authority. So it is the Commissioner who draws up the National Civil Aviation Security Program. Like in the USA, it is the Assistant Secretary of the TSA who does it. That's his counterpart there.
The first question?
Now the first question. Cybersecurity threats? Yes, indeed. They are extremely serious. We have an organization called the CERT-IN, which leads the evaluation of the threat and countermeasures to the threat. It is embedded in the Ministry of IT, and it has a very close linkage and a program with the United States of America.
Thank you. During the day this morning, we heard quite a lot about what I would call essentials of approaching the market in India.
Yeah.
I wonder whether or not the sum of the essentials is sufficient for success if you put your efforts into that. And I'd be interested to know from the experts who talk to us about, including describing the essentials, which of the essentials are the most essential? Because I have a feeling you could spend an enormous amount of time on the essentials and still not necessarily come up with something that's sufficient. Coming with that, I would find some sort of niggle in the back of my mind that there is an inbuilt reluctance to accept what goes to getting the best, the front edge of the technology wave. That, as it were, I have a feeling on some of the characteristics, you, as it were, might go on with the F-16 gradually improving it forever, because you never want to throw it away. And therefore, I suppose, if you put all your efforts into getting an enormous amount of work into essentials, what is it that gives you the edge against your competitors?
Sanjeev, would you like to answer that? The essentials of
Doing business in India.
of doing business in India.
Very interesting, because I was having a long chat talk this morning with some business partners who were here, and basically the essentials I think today really are is that I think in the West you have over-engineered and over-specified products. I think we need to go back to a simpler life. I think what John also showed, that graph of how the prices have almost doubled. In fact, in the last 5 years, the prices have doubled. Things are becoming unaffordable. I think in a growing market, we need to get back to being a lot simpler, going back to doing things that are effective, doing things which are essential. We do not have the luxury of paying for the best, but let's get it done by something which is more affordable.
Can I
Yes,
contribute?
please.
Because I think it's a very important question you asked.
Mic's not working.
That's essential. Can you hear me, Jay? Yeah. Okay. I think it's a very important question you raised, because if I was sitting here and I heard all these things, I was wondering where to start. But that's exactly the problem, because there is so much to be done. There's so much space, so much improvement, there's so much room for improvement. Right from, just take simple stuff like camera surveillance. The ability to, if you have, like in London, you have, say, 20,000 or 30,000 or 50,000 cameras, whatever the number may be. But where's the ability to figure out which are the right images to look at? Right? Start with that. Just seeing, just looking out itself has a huge potential. Right down to training and making people aware. Like they do in Israel, for example. An 85-year-old lady in Israel knows exactly what to do when she sits on a bus. She looks around to see if there are any strange packages around. So there's a whole universe out there of opportunities. Question is, what is your expertise and where are you comfortable? And then we move forward from that point.
You had a second part also, your question, and that was about
The F-16s.
The F-16 and
The fixation without reading.
An inbuilt reluctance to do what is necessary to operate at the front edge of technology.
Mr. Mr. Would
Yeah.
you like to say something?
Please, I'd like to ask a question. We're currently in this country going through the whole iteration about our own nuclear deterrent and the business of nuclear threats to this country, and in which I would include nuclear material rather than just weapons. The Islamist websites tell us that as a result of the assassination, whatever phrase you want to use, of Osama bin Laden, that these sorts of weapons will be used against targets, generally. And then at the same time we see terrorists raiding bases which have nuclear-capable aircraft on them, and then making the very clear statement that they don't intend to take over Pakistani nuclear sites. Well, if that's the case, why are they saying it? What are the preparations like inside your country for this, to counter this sort of CBRN threat? And what are the opportunities there?
Yeah, I believe this mic's not working, but I
It
think
is a little
you can
bit.
probably hear me in the end. There are two parts to your question. One is the state of play in Pakistan. One is the state of responses in India, if there are any. So as far as the situation in Pakistan is concerned, I mean, there are two ways of looking at it. One is that more and more, there's a chapter in Bruce Rydell's book also which alludes to that. There have been writings that have been there in the past which have said that the Pakistani military is unlikely to squander their crown jewels away that easily, because that is the central element of their being able to negotiate whatever they wish to with the United States, particularly as the US is most concerned about a dirty bomb falling in the hands of terrorists, and therefore its implications, not just for India, but its implications, I suppose, for Western forces, its implications for Western forces in the region. At the same time, the stability, because nuclear weapons and their usage, as many would know, would lead to response, counter-response, etc., etc. So there is that one school of thought. The second school of thought is that the Pakistani army, which is really the one which is in control, at least up to now, has put together measures which are fairly secretive in terms of anybody being able to get hold of the nuclear device, because the device and the nuclear weapon systems are divided into several parts. The trigger mechanism are kept separately, the launch mechanisms are kept separately, and the warhead itself, which is really the bomb, are kept in some deep secret tunnel, as we hear. So I think generally there is that room of comfort now. Now the point is that what happens in Pakistan 3 to 5 years down the line, when the next lot of military leaders who might emerge after Kayani would be more and more hardline and would be really Zia's boys. As many of us know, General Zia-ul Haq put into play a plan to Islamize an Islamic Pakistan, so therefore you have every possibility very soon of right-leaning, hardline military commanders who would then be in alliance with hardline groups and use possibly nuclear weapons to blackmail India further. They haven't yet stopped from blackmailing. I mean, all sorts of things they've done from Mumbai to previously have had an element of nuclear blackmail. What is India's response mechanisms? India's response mechanism is there have been very few statements that have come out from India which have actually caused a certain degree of concern in Pakistan. My basic view is that deterrence works if your enemy knows that you have the capability of using a weapon system, and therefore they will not use their own weapon system. So the last we heard was one statement by a former Indian Army chief who had to question, responded to say that if Pakistan was to ever consider using nuclear weapons against India, India's response would be so severe that Pakistan would cease to exist as a functional state, which apparently really alarmed Rawalpindi and others.
Really?
Okay.
They were alarmed.
Now, what are the on the ground, and there's something like what Mr. Thal often refers to, that what are the on-ground measures that we have in place? Clearly few and far between. My understanding is probably the political leadership and a certain part of the military has certain drills in place where they would probably be protected in the event of an attack. The rest of us are in God's hands.
Thank you.
May I just add to what Maruf has said? With respect to the threat emanating from Pakistan in terms of a nuclear incident, I don't think it's going to happen from the Taliban alone. It's going to happen through a suborning of the army. And if a situation were to transpire where the army was to align with the Taliban in a new kind of Islamic Emirate of Pakistan, the threat would then become real. And I think that is a possibility which people are now contemplating as one of the things that could happen if Pakistan was to go down the way of anarchy that it already is moving towards. That is one thing. The strategic response as far as India is concerned to a nuclear incident is something which is not openly discussed. You know, it's only very few in the government who would be privy, but of course the concept of second use is always there of response. As far as interdicting CBRN incidents of the type that could occur, for example, a dirty bomb or a radiological device. The Disaster Management Authority in India is in the process of laying down the parameters of all the CBRNE equipment that is required to be procured and installed in places, in public places, which could be threatened by such events. So there is a tremendous opportunity for the sale of equipment and technology related to CBRNE. So,
Thank you.